Hello and welcome to Unshakable with Lovell Casiero. I am so glad you're here today. I have a wonderful guest today by the name of Lior Sekler. And what an amazing story and an unshakable story that Lior has. Today, he is a passionate hotelier with over 25 years of hospitality experience. He was born in Tel Aviv, Israel, by a single parent. He moved into adulting at a very young age of his life. He loves travel. He served in the Israeli army. And I think what's most fascinating is that this young man growing up knew what it was like to have to wear a gas mask to school. He has a story of resilience and persistence and not letting your beginnings define your life, but being able to embrace the life you've been given, find a purpose, and lead others as an example of how you made it through. That's what you're going to hear when you meet Lior. Without further ado, let's get started.
I see hate through the pain. I see light in the rain. Dreams of brighter days. Tell me what you're thinking. I have hope in my spirit, flames of love in my heart. Baby, let me tell you something. I'm about to dance. You realize you're not in control. Once again, tell you once again.
Hello and welcome to Unshakable with Lovell Casiero. I am so glad you're here today, and I am especially glad that my guest today, Lior Sekler, is with us. Welcome to Unshakable, Lior.
Thank you, Lovell. It's a pleasure to chat with you this morning.
It is a pleasure to have you, and it seems quite daunting that it was 3 months ago already that we met in Florida, in Fort Myers. Time flies, and I used to have a job like your job, and I know how big that job is. And so there's always, as you said before, a challenge around every corner when you're the chief commercial officer for a hotel company. So kudos to you. It's been interesting times in the hotel industry, but we're going to talk about some other things today. So many people know you as a successful hospitality executive, but your story began very differently. And when you and I had time to sit and chat at ByTech, I learned that before the boardroom, there was a young boy in Israel walking to school every day wearing a gas mask. So take us back to that time and help us understand what life was like for you.
So for those that are familiar and those that are not, Israel is a beautiful country. It's a country that roots in great history, has a great education system, healthcare system, and a very cohesive, warm, loving society. And my mother, who's American, moved to Israel 2 years before I was born and raised me in Israel as a single parent. And growing up, like we said, obviously, people are aware that there is tumultuous situations. And I grew up through 3 wars in Israel. In fact, during the Gulf War, I recall there was Scud missile launchers maybe a block away from my house. And it's definitely makes you mature quicker. It also makes you appreciate life very differently. When you wake up in the morning, you go to school, you open the news, you see buses blowing up in your town, people getting killed for various unknown reasons. And sadly, you also develop a certain immunity to that as well. So obviously you mourn the losses, you grieve, but then you also have to learn to move on because it's so repetitive and so cyclical that you develop a certain personality and a certain approach to these scenarios.
You know, Lior, I thank you for starting with what an amazing country Israel is. And I have always, and I will one day go to Israel. And the reason you mentioned the history that is there that goes back over 2,000 years. And when you're faith-based like me, you want to walk on that ground. You want to see that place. And often when I see some of the things that happens, I'm always amazed at how it doesn't destroy those special places. And I'm sure it has probably in some ways destroyed them, but I do want to go there one day. And I every time I plan to go, it seems like it's not the right time to go. So, but that is certainly on my bucket list. I hope that I am able to get there sooner than later. It is a wonderful place. How do you think that that kind of because not only were you a young child going to school in that environment, you also served in the Israeli army, because I believe that is a requirement when you graduate high school. Is that correct?
Yes. So when you graduate high school, now this is going back over 30 years ago, men were required to serve for 3 years, and then women were required to serve for 2 years, mandatory. Now, I mentioned I was an only child, so the governing laws for the recruitment is that if you're an only child, you are not going to be assigned to a combat unit, just because, unless your parents sign a waiver that they're willing for you to serve in a combat unit. But obviously my mom was not going to be in that position. So you go through, when you're a junior in high school, you go through a series of tests to qualify your skill set, your intelligence level, and there's a score and a rating system that they use. And then based on that, you're given 3 options to choose from of where you're assigned to, obviously excluding the combative part of it. So I was actually given the option to become a drill sergeant, or go to a training program to become a drill sergeant, which is kind of like the closest scenario to that. And I will say that it was very difficult, and that's really where that shaping me to an adult and getting me ready, I guess, for the big boy life really took place, is being sent to a military base in the middle of the West Bank for 3 months of intense training, where they really try to, I guess, mentally break you down in order to build you up again. So it's a very rigorous training program. But it was interesting. It was intense. I faced situations where, just serving in the West Bank, we were obviously attacked by the locals. I had to protect myself and my fellow soldiers. So facing death for the first time and in that combative situation was obviously emotionally taxing, but also just learning certain skills to both for myself as a commander, but also for training others to become strong soldiers, was a very meaningful experience.
You know, Lior, I kind of made a note when you said you were the equivalent or training, you were a drill sergeant. I'm thinking, I know how helpful that might be and as a leader in the hospitality industry when you're trying to get people to proactively sell and make sales calls. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But, you know, one of the conversations that you and I had at BITAC, and I just want to give a little background on this. I was working at the Hilton Crystal City on 9/11, and I was 1 mile from the Pentagon that day. And it was very, very scary for all of us. And I often say, like, you will never forget the people that you were working with that day, because it was something that in my lifetime had never, ever come to the shores of the United States. And all of a sudden I was a mile from that plane that hit the Pentagon, and people were taking refuge from the airport that closed immediately, obviously, and the Pentagon, and finding their way to our hotel. So I will never forget that day and how I felt. But you and I were chatting about this at BITEC, and you said, growing up, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but if you remember the conversation, you kind of had a comment of, it wasn't like we should have taken 9/11 lightly by any means, but for you, it was probably not as, oh my goodness, what's going on here, as we would have experienced because of what you had seen and how you had grown up in Israel.
Yeah, so like I said, I grew up in a country that unfortunately was very familiar with those kind of attacks. When you go down the street or you go to a club, and then, there's the risk of somebody using themselves as their body as a bomb to kill others. It was unfortunately too frequent for some, and we're used to it. We're just used to, unfortunately, those scenarios. So terrorism and terrorist attacks were obviously very common. You grew up with them, you're familiar with them, you know the behavior. Also in the Army, you learn about some of the culture and the background and how to deal with some of those individuals that you face. So it's all of those attacks are horrible. Terrorism is horrible. But when it becomes part of your life, you don't become immune to it, but you learn to manage it, grieve with it, and then move on, probably in a more rapid way than people who are not familiar with it.
I think about your mom. She must have been a very special person to help you be able to navigate that and be able to tell that story today in a way of such amazing resilience. And so I unfortunately, when you haven't lived it, you can't imagine. And it's like, my aunt recently lost her husband, and she said, someone said to her, I know how you feel. And she said, I thought to myself, no, you don't. Like, you have no idea. And so similarly, I don't know that I can relate to how you grew up only through my imagination, right? But what do you think that if we fast forward to today, so you are responsible for a portfolio of hotels, you are responsible for a team of people that goes beyond your corporate team, but deep into each of the hotels, has, leaders there that are selling. And as a leader, when you look at your attributes and the things that you bring to the table as a leader, how much of that was formed in Israel?
So I'll step back. So when I was assigned to become a basic training commander and then a drill sergeant, I was assigned to a couple of bases that housed, back then, it was the big immigration from Ethiopia and Russia. And Israel and the Army had to cycle through the individuals through the military system. And I got assigned to these bases, and we had to learn how to navigate cultural boundaries with communicating and facilitating dialogue and training for those that came from other cultures. Primarily Ethiopia, because there were a lot of cultural differences there in terms of how you communicate, body language, and very sensitive to that. So learning through that and navigating and managing different personalities and cultures was the first step in the communication process. I also had to train kids, because there were kids, 17, 18 years old, that came from low socioeconomic backgrounds, criminal backgrounds, that had no discipline, and had to get them through the system of gaining discipline, gaining respect, tough love, if you want to call it. And that was also very rewarding. And then just ensuring that they complete the process effectively and properly and with satisfaction. And I developed really the desire to really excel and strive for perfection, if you want to call it, whatever perfection looks like. But making sure that those individuals feel satisfied, they feel gratitude, and they feel that they were accomplished by being able to learn and then go out to the world as more successful individuals.
You know, I was thinking of so many attributes as you were saying that, like, you know, a really, really good leader elevates the people that work for them before they think about elevating themselves. And I say very often, that was the turning point in my career as a leader when I realized it wasn't all about Lovell. It was really very little about Lovell. It was more about the people that I was serving and how I could impact them. And I think the defining moment for me was when I realized that what I was doing was actually impacting people, because you just feel like sometimes that you're doing your job, you have goals to meet, and you're raising you're meeting certain data metrics. I know you come from a revenue management background, and that is a lot of numbers and a lot of data metrics. But at the end of the day, there's a very human piece to all of this, because we are influencing and impacting people that have families and have, you know, bills to pay and homes to keep up and groceries to buy and gas. And it's not, you know, that's the data that we should really be focusing on when we go in every day. And to be put in that situation where you had different people from different cultures. I was thinking, as you were saying that I learned, probably not soon enough in my career, but finally learned that you can't lead any two people the same way. You inspire them, you lead them, you coach them as the individual that they are, because there's no one size fits all. Would you agree in your current role that you have?
Yes. A lot of personalities, a lot of different management styles. But it's also about collaborating. And also the biggest thing, especially in my role now, is getting those individuals to bring their skill set, their personalities, their management styles, their knowledge together to collaborate, as opposed to working in silos. I find that even in our commercial environment, whether it's at the corporate level or the property level, individuals are still focused on their lane and swimming in their lane and making sure that they achieve their results, but as opposed to collaborating to helping them achieve their results maybe better, and also helping others achieve their results and sharing resources, sharing knowledge. So when I first started in this role, breaking down the silos and getting the collaboration was really the pillar to the progression.
You know, we've been talking about commercial strategies as a discipline, and when that became the label for the discipline that we have in hospitality sales, it was all about collaboration. It was about bringing the sales team, the marketing team, and the revenue management team together with one mind and one accord, and the collaboration and the reaching the goals and knowing where you had to plug in your expertise to achieve the goals and lift each other up and help each other be successful. When I left it at the end of 2025, I felt like we were still struggling. It sounds like, you know, you really had an opportunity when you went into your most recent role, but I felt like we were still struggling in some ways to really bust those silos. And I think we've gained ground, and we've made some progress, but I think there's still some work to do there. Not sure what that answer is, but just an observation that it feels like there's still work to do in the collaboration and silo piece.
100%. I think still people have I wouldn't say their vested interest, but they have their goals, their targets, their incentive plans, whatever they benchmark their performance on. But we really try to hone in on taking those commercial strategy calls every week and not making it a one-person show. It's not just the revenue management show. It's the DOS, the director of rooms, the general manager, the director of marketing. Everybody needs to collaborate. Everybody has to come in. And, I'm going to probably throw in also the famous buzzword everybody uses now is AI, and how that also kind of comes into play in getting those platforms in and then getting all those individuals engaged in a whole new space that they're just exploring and just trying to figure out how to navigate around.
Yeah, I did a recent podcast episode, which was a solo episode that I did, kind of bringing together some of the commencement speeches. And I found it interesting that the previous CEO of Google spoke at one of the commencement speeches. I'm struggling to remember his name right now, but he had a lot of pushback when he started talking about AI and how AI was going to take us into the future. And it was one of the fastest moving technologies that we've yet to see. And, if you compare that to like when cell phones came out and everything became in the palm of your hand versus where we started with computers. But I think people need to understand, and I'd love to get your take on this. I use AI. Don't apologize for it. I mean, why not? It is very, it creates a lot of time management efficiencies for me. And yes, I go back and I proof it. And yes, I want to make sure it's what I would be proud to say and not somebody creating words that, are putting words in my mouth. But I don't think people should be afraid of losing their jobs. I think they should be excited about learning how to do their job differently, and that in hospitality industry specifically, I think that we will create new positions and new job responsibilities. Are you seeing any of that at this point? I know sometimes we're a little slow in our industry to adapt the technology, but just curious.
Yeah, I think we're still in the infancy stages. It's going to take a few more years to fully understand and adapt to it. But I'm sitting in conferences right now and listening to the presenters talk about it in different components. And the way I interpret it and see it is more increasing efficiency. So maybe you're taking your mundane tasks and duties and then maybe allocating those towards AI to help automate some of it. So it gives you the time and the ability to focus on bigger picture items, on strategic items, on creative items. So it's, again, taking away from some of the, I don't call minutia, but some of the areas where you spend time on. And also, you're venturing out to a space where you're pulling in ideas and data points from so many resources that you might not have been able to tap into before effectively. And now it's kind of given to you almost on a silver platter, and you can just do what you want to do with it, but you might not have had a resource before, just like Amazon. I mean, I think about how do we go shopping before Amazon? If I needed pink rainbow socks, tomorrow, where am I going to go find pink rainbow socks? I'd have to go to multiple stores and hope that they have them. But now I can go and in about 5 seconds, I can have pink rainbow socks probably delivered in 2 hours. So it gave me the accessibility. And that's what I think these platforms are. They're giving you the opportunity to explore, enhance your productivity. Yes, certain jobs will get eliminated, but maybe those individuals will then be able to use their skills and knowledge to transfer them elsewhere.
It's funny that you said that about Amazon. I say all the time that if I don't get a package for a couple of days, they knock on the door to make sure I'm okay. So you're right. It did create a lot of efficiency. That was a great example. I just think that hospitality always is about people, and that you're never going to have to worry about not having the human concept in hospitality, because that's what hospitality is all about. And so I do think AI is going to help us do our job a lot better. And no matter where it is, but I also think that we need some rules and regulations around it for certain things, because there's always, bad actors that are looking to use something like that to cause, situations. But I do want, before we run out of time, you love to travel, and you've been to a lot of countries, according to the bio that you sent. I think you've been to 60, I don't have it in front of me, but was it 67?
Yep. As of last January, 67.
Yep. Good for you. I thought I had been to a lot of countries, but I'm far from that. But tell us what one of your favorite experiences traveling is, has been.
So one that always resonates with me, and in fact, my screensaver on my computer is a picture from that trip, is a trip to South Africa and to the safari in South Africa. Spent about a week immersing in the middle of Kruger National Park with the animals, and it's just beautiful. It's magical. It's rewarding just to not only be in nature, because nature is beautiful, but also just being in this environment and seeing all of these beautiful animals, these creatures, and how they interact, how they live their lives. I mean, yes, I saw some very gruesome things. I saw a leopard eat a steenbok, and I saw some other animals attack each other. But I mean, that's their daily life. That's how they survive. That's how they live. And it's just fascinating just to see how they interact. And it was just very rewarding to spend some time in their natural habitat.
That is one of my go-to stress management things, is just to get out in nature, whether it's a hike or a walk on the beach, or simply sitting out back and watching the wildlife in the back of my house, just to clear your mind, reconnect. Because when you think about, like you said, maybe the gruesome things that you saw, because that's how they live. It's the instinct of an animal. I'm always surprised at my little domestic dog, who is not even 2 yet, but her instincts are just beyond impressive. I remember taking her on a hike when she was little, and she wouldn't even go down the stairs in our house, but she would run down those rocks and run up the side of a hill, because that was her habitat. And that instinct that's in there, I think, there's probably a lot we could talk about the instinct of a leader, but that's probably a good blog or a good topic. But Lior, as we start to wrap up here, I talked to you last week via email, and we chatted for a few minutes today. And I was saying to you how I never lead with politics. I'm not a very political person, although I do my best to vote and be a good citizen in that respect. But I was so looking forward to this interview after hearing your story and sitting one-on-one with you at BITEC and hearing about your life growing up, and also knowing how accomplished you are as a leader in hospitality. I know the job you have is a big job, because I did that for many years. But what I would, I guess, not final question, but without bringing politics into this, what do you want people to know and understand about the everyday life that people are living right now in Israel?
Well, so even after I moved to the States, I made it a point that every year I go back to visit my friends. And going back to my point earlier about how cohesive and connected the society is, I still keep in touch with everybody that I grew up with, all the kids I grew up with in my neighborhood decades ago. And because you just don't lose that. It's such a bond and such a connection. And even though people move to other cities or countries, that bond always exists. So I make sure that I always keep in touch with all of those individuals. So when I go back, I really reconnect with them like we never left off. But the last couple of trips that I've taken to Israel, It's been rough. I saw people that were just frustrated. They were frustrated because of the economic climate, the safety and security. And listen, right now, it's not easy. It's actually terrible that you cannot have a full night's sleep because you're most likely going to get woken up 3 or 4 times by sirens asking you to go to a shelter or a bunker to protect yourself. And people were just frustrated. It's probably the lowest morale level I've seen in the last couple of visits that I've seen in a very, very long time. And it's sad. It's unfortunate because people are very creative. They're very driven. In fact, you probably know that much of the high tech comes out of Israel. I mean, there's a very strong high tech community, very brilliant, very sharp, very smart individuals that have done great and will continue to do great. But they cannot be hampered by what's going on, and they need to be able to live their lives. They need to be able to support their families. They need to be able to sleep well, get up in the morning, and feel safe. Things need just to turn around in order for that to happen, because you cannot sustain that kind of a lifestyle.
And, I said it before, and I'll say it for the actual podcast. You and I were chatting before, but and they're living in these circumstances because of the decisions that others are making. And it's frustrating. And I feel that way sometimes here, but in this country, but it's so much less awful, if you will. I mean, we can get upset about our politics. We can get upset about the division in our country and all of that. But as I said, no child anywhere in any country should have to wear a gas mask to school. And I just wanted to not only be able to tell your story of resilience and how you could, I even say this sometimes about my circumstances growing up in a broken home. I could have chosen to let that define me and let that turmoil that I grew up in between my parents for the first 30 years of my life not getting along. I could have let that define me, and I could have used that as an excuse to, not succeed or not try to be a decent human being and an accomplished person. But it drove me to be, all that I could be. And I see that also in you. And you take all of the things that you learned. And even when you were talking about still being in contact with the people that you grew up with, that is, some people aren't even in contact with their own flesh and blood family members. But the fact that you created such a bond that you go back, you even when you could say, oh, it's not a good time to go back, but you go back and you visit, it just shows you what goodness that you created in you growing up in that. And it's just, I can't put words to it, but it has been a pleasure to have you tell your story, not only your story of growing up in Tel Aviv, but also your story of being in the hospitality industry. I always love to talk shop. I spent 30 plus years in that industry, and to say I don't miss it would be I do miss it. I miss the people. I miss the occasions to have a win and open a hotel and all of those things. And I miss the travel, believe it or not. But I'm off to a new chapter, and I'm really glad that you've been part of that chapter by attending here. I always ask my guests just to leave us with a parting thought, whatever you would like to share with the listeners today.
So I think the message is, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid of obstacles. Don't be afraid of barriers. Don't be afraid to challenge yourself. Don't be afraid to fail. And don't be afraid to be open and leave your ego at the door and just be able to be nimble and challenge and be challenged.
That was a minute of some very, very amazing wisdom right there. I will go back and listen to that and probably make a couple of notes to make sure I'm practicing some of that myself. I love leave your ego at the door, and I love don't be afraid to challenge yourself. That was just a couple of them. Amazing. So until I see you again, be safe, be loved, and most of all, be you. God bless.
I see fate through the pain. I see light in the rain. Dreams of brighter days. Tell me what you're thinking. I have hope in my spirit, flames of love in my heart. Baby, let me tell you something. I'm about to dance. You realize you're not in control. Once again, tell you once again.